Hey everyone, thanks for joining tonight. Trish Thacker here. Really happy to be joining the patiently waiting community again. So thanks so much for inviting me into your evening or your day or whatever time you're watching this discussion. So we are continuing to move through our six-part series. Tonight is part 5. We're going to talk about finding calm. So we'll just go ahead and get started with that then. Before we get started, um, I invite you to kind of check in with yourself. We do this every time. Close your eyes, take a nice deep breath if you want to, and just check in. How are you feeling? Are you feeling ready to listen? Are you feeling like you're ready to contemplate the information and hear what's going on? Or are you feeling distracted? Is there a task that needs to be taken care of before you can be able to focus? Do you need to close a door? Do you need to go into a different room, write something down? Whatever it might be. I would just invite you to go ahead and take care of that so that you can be present here with our discussion today. So far, we have talked about attachment, which is the process of internalizing the primary attachment strategies of our primary caregiver. We've talked about trauma, which is what happens to the brain and body in the presence of traumatic events. We've talked about temperament, which is how we tend to think, to decide, to understand, rejuvenate, and plan. And we've talked about shame, which is the internalized negative experience and beliefs about our own lovability and worth. And today, we'll be talking about finding calm. And so that means we'll be identifying beliefs and practices and activities that fill us up, that bring us back into alignment with ourselves, that make us feel like the best of ourselves, that help us feel calm and whole and peaceful. That's what we're talking about in this discussion about finding calm. Because, really, we can, when we look at and try to understand better the processes and principles of trauma and attachment and shame and temperament and all of those kinds of things, we are looking often at the things that challenge us. We also have to be able to look at the things that help us stay whole. If we're, that it's that old thing, if you tell somebody not to think about pink elephants, as soon as you do, then they're thinking about pink elephants. So if we're always focusing on, I'm really struggling with attachment, I struggle with trauma, I struggle with shame, those kinds of things, we're always looking at those things that are negative. So sometimes we need to really intentionally engage in the processes and beliefs and practices that help us feel whole, that help us feel like the best of ourselves, like who we are. So before we kind of move into that, identifying strategies and things like that for finding calm, let's take a moment and identify some of the influences and behaviors that can increase our own physical activation. They can increase anxiety, fear, our sense of unease, because sometimes we need to have some awareness of that as well, so that we can intervene when those things happen. I'm going to adjust to where I am seated with respect to my screen here for a minute because it's tiny. So I need to be able to see it better. Thank you. So that's much better for me. So we're going to be identifying influences and behaviors that increase, again, that sense of physical activation, kind of feeling on edge, like crawly out of your skinny, that kind of feeling, or feeling anxious or fearful or just any other type of unease that we might be experiencing. So some of the things that can contribute to that are genetic predisposition. There are some folks who come from a long family history of people who have struggled with anxiety or depression or more severe mental illnesses. And so there's already a predisposition that exists within our genetic makeup. So that can contribute to a general baseline sense of unease. There are some medications and some medical conditions that can contribute to that. Some kids who might be taking some medication for ADD, those tend to be stimulant medications, and they can cause people to feel revved up. There are medical conditions like if someone is hyperthyroid, they can feel a little bit revved up, and there are some other things that can contribute to that that might exist biochemically or medically within us. chemicals like caffeine and alcohol. So caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant, legal and addictive in our country here. So that can cause people to feel revved up. And kind of counterintuitively, some people feel revved up when they consume alcohol. And sometimes there's a rebound anxiety that comes from consuming alcohol and alcohol products. A lack of sleep for some people that can make them really tired, and over time that can also cause this real sense of physical unease and physical activation, because we really need sleep in order to rejuvenate. It's when our experiences from the day get transferred into our middle and long-term memories. There's all sorts of things that happen for us that help us stay well when we sleep, and over time, if we have a chronic lack of sleep, we'll start to see um, other body systems that'll be affected by that, and that can lead to that sense of activation. Um, Leaving tasks incomplete can actually cause to that can influence that sense of unease and some mind clutter. So if there are things that I've left undone that I need to remember to do because they are undone, I have to continually remember them because they are undone. And that just really starts to take up a lot of space in our heads. And that can cause us to start feeling stressed and activated and kind of driven sometimes, because we're constantly trying to remember the things that we haven't completed. So if we habitually are leaving things undone, that can really contribute to a baseline sense of stress or unease or activation. Overscheduling and overcommitting can create a strong sense of pressure. And the more we lose the ability to have margin, the harder things get. If I have no margin and an emergency occurs, then I can't even finesse my day. Then like everything falls apart, and then we have to go through that really hard work of trying to kind of get everything back on the rails. Um, and one of the other really important things that I think we've lost sight of in our culture sometimes is that we can only listen to our intuition if we have time enough to hear it. We have to have those moments of quiet time. Otherwise, if we're just moving from activity to activity to activity, meeting to meeting to meeting, task to task to task, we don't have time to stop and listen to something that's causing us to feel uncomfortable, or something we might feel tense about, or something like that. So we have to have enough margin to have time and quiet enough to even listen to our own intuition. And when we don't have that, that can contribute to that sense of stress and activation. Uh, if we are behaving in a manner that is inconsistent with our personal identity or values, so if I work in a job, if I have a high value for honesty and I work in a job where honesty is not valued, or maybe even my supervisor asks me to lie or to exaggerate or something like that, over time, that's really going to wear away at me. And that'll increase that, again, that activation, that stress. Some people would experience that as anxiety or fear. It can lead to burnout, those kinds of things. Um, so having exposure or an overexposure to news, that can absolutely contribute to stress, and that kind of sense of physical activation, that sense of unease. The nature of news programming, especially on TV and things like that, is that it is constantly trying to catch our attention, and so we will constantly hear that like there's breaking news, and this is, new and important information, even if they're saying the same thing over and over, regardless of what channel or that you might listen to, your preferred news outlet. Overexposure, and even exposure at all, for some people who are really sensitive, can contribute again to that sense of unease and physical activation. Social media, that can contribute to it. That tends to lead to comparisons. We are subject to constant persuasion. There's these algorithms that function within social media that try to get us to buy things. They'll continue to put information in front of us that will get a reaction from us. So, I mean, that system is set up to cause us to react, and we can just get our bodies, our physical bodies, can just get really tired of that. Social isolation. Coming out of COVID here, social isolation can really contribute to a sense of unease, to loneliness over time when we don't get feedback and connection from other people. It's really hard to have a balance point against negative thoughts or feelings. We can really start to interpret things in a manner that's negative and assume that things that are kind of pointing at us or targeting us, and that's not true, but that can happen in that sense of isolation. What also can happen is that some people will develop kind of a baseline anxiety from that isolation because we really do, we're wired for connection. And then, ironically, the anxiety or that anxiousness that gets created from the isolation will actually inhibit us from reaching out when we're able to have those connections and to reestablish those relationships. Um, and if we tend to be caretaking instead of connecting, if all I do is take care of people and help and try to meet other people's needs, but I'm not really connecting on that human level, as we've talked about with attachment and trauma and the brain systems and our mirror neurons, and that's kind of how we share our emotional states. If I'm not actually connecting with you in an authentic and deep way, I'm only taking care of you over time. I am going to be in a situation where my needs don't get met. And as our needs don't get met, our sense of unease will increase. Excuse me. So more influences and behaviors that can increase our sense of emotional discomfort. So sometimes when we are coping with discomfort, our coping strategies actually make us more uncomfortable. For example, I heard a person say, it was actually a while back, it was probably more than a year ago, I heard somebody said to me when we were talking, she said, I've recently realized that I spend money when I'm scared or anxious, but that makes me scared and anxious about how much I'm spending. So the things we're using to cope might actually be making things worse. Some people drink alcohol to cope, and that can create rebound anxiety. It can create a whole other set of problems if we are using alcohol to cope instead of actually dealing with whatever is going on. Avoiding people or situations can then create its own crisis. So if I am avoiding opening my mail so that I never actually get my bills, then I don't pay my bills. That'll create another crisis, for bill collectors, or you start getting, slips of overdue notices and those kinds of things, which will then could make somebody not want to open their mail, which will then increase the problem. So you can really start these kind of self-fulfilling prophecies where what we're doing is actually making things worse. Staying inside or sitting excessively, maybe because we're trying to get work done, or for any other reason, or because it's a pandemic and you can't get outside and it's winter in Minnesota. But if we are staying inside for whatever reason, what that also then means is that we have decreased fresh air, exposure to the outside. Just being outside, for how we are wired, for most people, will have a calming effect. There's a lot of new research that talks about, they call them like wilderness baths or green baths, where somebody might go for a walk on a trail where there's a lot of trees or along a river or creek or something like that. But the exposure to natural elements seems to have a calming effect on our brains and our bodies. And there's a lot of theories about why that is. One of the most interesting that I've heard is that by being surrounded by nature, we are surrounded by the rhythms of nature, and the rhythms of nature are, by definition, not stressed. You can't, if you take a rose that's in a bud and you try to pull the petals open to make it bloom faster, it won't bloom. You'll just tear the bud apart. We have to, nature in and of itself has its own, requires its own patience, and it has its own time and its season. And as we are surrounded by that and by breeze and trees and those kinds of things, it seems to have that calming effect. And if we're staying inside all the time, we don't get the benefit of that. So, in terms of like finding those things, those activities and beliefs and behaviors that help us return to a state of calm, so that from that state of calm, we can look at all the challenges in our lives and we can be healthy and balanced. What are some of those potential solutions? What are the things that we can do to help us be calm? So there are some physical solutions that we can have. So one of the things we can do is what's called diaphragmatic breathing. Now, people who are singers and performers often talk about breathing from the diaphragm. So that's that area kind of right under your rib cage. But there's a kind of a more targeted practice of diaphragmatic breathing that will literally, because of the nature of it, it will calm down your physiology. And so the way to do that would be, I'll try to demonstrate it here. I don't know if I can get it in the window, but if I would clasp my hands so that they're facing out like this, you can see the palms of my hands here, and then palms up, lift them over my head like this, and then breathe really deeply from my diaphragm. Having my hands up like this causes me to have to breathe more deeply from my diaphragm. And so it's taking nice deep breaths in and focusing on the exhale. It's a really critical part of it. And it takes several breaths. It's not like you take 2 breaths like this and then all of a sudden you feel better. So it's, it's that stretch up, the deep breath in, and focus on the exhale and then do that. And it'll take a couple of minutes, but it will calm your body down. So now I'm seated in a chair while I do that. So I'm not at risk for getting dizzy or anything like that. If you ever have a history of getting dizzy, please do that exercise in a chair, and get used to that deep breathing before trying it standing up. You want to make sure you're not going to get dizzy and fall over. And there are some people who, when they do that, will tip their head back, and the act of having their hands above their head and their head tipped back will make them super dizzy. So just be careful and kind of see how practice it when you're not anxious, and see how it works for you. But that deep diaphragmatic breathing can, in relatively short order, like 3 to 5 minutes, literally calm down your physical activation, calm down your physiology. Now, in the moment of activation, 3 to 5 minutes might feel like a long time, but in the greater scheme of things, it's 3 to 5 minutes. So the diaphragmatic breathing is something that we can do physically in real time to help ourselves calm down. So some other things that we can do, and I'm so sorry, gosh, this is just absolutely tiny. I'm totally going to lean in, and I'm very sorry about that. I should have printed this off. So if you're feeling really activated and you're trying to find ways to calm down, start with your body. And so that can be doing anything, changing your posture. If you're sitting down, stand up. If you're standing, you can sit down. If you're in the office, you can take a little walk around your office or walk around the cubicle, or that kind of a thing. Because as soon as we move our bodies, then we shift our state of mind. Excuse me. So again, changing posture. We can do targeted muscle relaxation. And so what that would be if I'm trying to calm down, I don't have to close my eyes. You can if you want, but you would get in kind of a comfortable position and then start either at your head or at your toes. And if you start at your head and you're doing targeted muscle relaxation, you would, it's kind of hard to flex the muscles in your head or your skull or your scalp. So what you could do is you could kind of start up here. You can focus on your shoulders and you can bring them down and then lift them up. Hold it there. Hold it tight. Count to 3 and relax. And then hold it tight. Count to 3 and relax. And then you would go down and you do your biceps and down to your hands, and then move to your back, your abdomen. Then you can move to your legs and all the way down to your toes. And what you do is you tighten the muscles, count to 3, and release. And do that several times. Sometimes 3 to 5 repetitions can be really helpful. But when you do that, there's a number of things you're doing. You're focusing on your body instead of what's going on that's causing the anxiousness. And you're helping your body release any tension that you might have by having the tension and release cycle of tense and release. Some other more long-term strategies that you can engage in is to, over time, learn to identify those signs that you have that you are getting activated. So for me, you know what, I learned a while back that when I start getting tense, my shoulders start going up like this. And literally, and somebody will come in and go, "Oh, I can see you're tense. Your shoulders are by your ears." I go, "Wow, there you go again." And so if I know that's happening, I can continually try to like readjust my shoulders. And if I just adjust my shoulders regularly, that will also help me. For some people, they'll find that they walk faster, they might talk faster, they might walk with clenched fists, that kind of thing. So once you know your own signs that you're getting physically activated, then you can intervene and help yourself calm down. So if I'm walking along and I realize that my hands are in fists, I'm like, oh, okay, that's my sign that I'm getting nervous. So or I'm getting activated would be a better word. So if I tend to do that, if I'm carrying my hands like this, I'm going to stretch them out. I'm going to relax. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I can do the diaphragmatic breathing if I have the opportunity. It doesn't always work if you're in a crowded elevator. I don't recommend it. But you can go get to find a place to be quiet and calm. And bring yourself back down to a more comfortable level. Habituated exercise is actually fantastic for long-term strategy for managing physical activation. So habituated is that thing that you do every day. And it doesn't have to be that you go to the gym every day for 2 hours. It can be that you get up and take a walk every morning with your dog or at lunch or something like that. But if it is habituated exercise practice that helps your body release tension on a regular basis, that is over the long term going to really help your physical activation to the baseline to go down. So managing your caffeine intake, managing alcohol intake, those kinds of things, that's really important baseline for managing that baseline physical activation or sense of uneasiness. There are some folks who won't drink caffeine after 12 or 1. You might have to experiment, but even if you're not feeling physically tired, the closer to your bedtime that you have caffeine, that you consume caffeine, there's all sorts of studies that show it really does interfere with the quality of your sleep. So being mindful of that is important. So finding grounding kinds of activities, like we talked about being outside. Some people do more mindful physical movement. They might do yoga, they might do Tai Chi or something like that, but it's finding the habituated movement and finding those activities that help us feel grounded. Sometimes it's listening to music, it can be singing. Singing is actually a whole brain activity. If you're not singing something that is rote, so like singing a Christmas carol that you know really well, but that you don't know all the words to, so you have to kind of focus on what the words are. That's like a whole brain activity, and that can help a lot in helping you in that moment to calm down. But even long term, that gives you some more options for helping yourself stay kind of in a calm, a less physically activated baseline state. So some philosophical or big picture strategies. And a really big thing is actually having a gratitude practice. Gratitude and fear do not easily coexist. So for some people, they might keep a gratitude journal. Some people will take a couple of moments and just say to themselves what they're grateful for. Some people will pray and express gratitude in that way. For me, there's a small group of women, and every day we share our gratitudes with each other, and it's great because it helps me stay accountable to making sure that I have awareness of my own gratitude. But as I read their gratitudes throughout the day, and everyone is kind of has their own time of day where they tend to do it. It's so encouraging to know that when I look at my texts that I'm going to see this. So Brene Brown, who is a shame researcher. One of the things that she's learned through 20 years of research is that it's not joy that makes us grateful. It's gratitude that makes us joyful. And the more grateful we are, the more we'll experience joy in our day-to-day lives. And joy is an amazing thing. We experience joy in our interconnectedness with people we love, when we're doing things where we feel gifted, where we're kind of in the flow. That's when we can really experience moments of joy, and joy is rejuvenating, absolutely. Back when we were talking about trauma and attachment in the brain, we talked about that hand model of the brain. So remember, it was the spinal cord, brainstem, limbic area, middle prefrontal cortex, and the frontal cortex. We talked about that middle prefrontal cortex area, right here, um, is an integrating structure in your brain. And so if you are trying to be mindful, if you are trying to you want your brain to operate in that integrated manner we've talked about. If you just look again at that hand and with the envisioning that this is the hand model of the brain and let yourself talk to yourself, you can say it out loud if you want to. But just, I'm looking at my hand model of the brain and I'm wanting my brain to be more integrated. I'm wanting it to function in a more integrated manner. And even as you say that, for many people, if they make that a habit, they will start feeling themselves calm down because it has become a habituated cue to calm down. And when we remind our brain to do this, that again, it helps that integrating structure, the middle prefrontal cortex. It connects down through the brain stem up um, through the cortex up here, which is our logic and reasoning and life experience. The fibers reach up and they reach back. And when they reach back into the brainstem area, they release a chemical that helps us calm down. So the mindfulness, remembering the hand model of the brain, can be a really helpful strategy. Um, Practicing, this is going to sound, I know it's kind of, you're like, oh, Trish, you're a therapist, whatever, you're saying that. But it's really true that when we are able to practice um, higher levels of self-compassion, we will help ourselves be more calm and will help reduce our physical activation and our sense of unease. How we judge and talk to ourselves can reduce the presence and intensity of a high alert state. As we become aware of that internal conversation, for some of us, we hear that internal voice, and it's just it's deeply critical and it's constant. It's just like a woodpecker in the back of your brain. Um, so being mindful of that and then intervening. And it's not even that you have to talk back to it, but if you recognize that critical voice is hammering you, it would be like you acknowledge it and then you shift your focus somewhere else. That's a very compassionate way to treat yourself. Um, just as if you were talking with a friend, if you were talking with a loved one or a child, and somebody were hammering at them, you would intervene and you would be gentle and protective. If we can start practicing some of those principles with ourselves, it really, really goes a long way. Um, Again, philosophical big picture solutions, the clarity of values and identity. If knowing what I believe is right and wrong and important, and then living in alignment with that, that will help. That helps everybody to be less physically activated and to have a sense of purpose with their life and what they're doing. Regular exercise, as we talked about, balanced diet, sufficient sleep, these things really positively influence all areas of life and functioning. Um, Maintaining perspective that our life occurs over the arc of time. We can get so focused on what's happening right here that we forget this is a point in time over the arc of our lives. And if you take a big breath and you think about your life happening over the arc of time, and that this is one little point along the arc, a lot of times that can help us to reach a more calm state. Some people talk about having the 30,000-foot view, like if you're right on the street view, you're seeing all the details, all the commotion, the chaos, and the pain. But from a plane way up here, we're above the clouds and the sunlight. We can look at it that way, but also we can see those really big picture patterns and principles, and that can really help us to achieve a greater state of calm on a regular basis. And related to that idea of the maintaining perspective about life happening along the arc of time, having the awareness that we can control what we do. We get to kind of control the input, but we don't get to control the outcome. We don't get to control anybody as much as we might want to. We have some influence and things like that, but we really, after a child is 2 years old and you can no longer pick them up and put them somewhere else, our ability to control anybody is really in many ways an illusion. And remembering that we have influence, but what we control is ourselves, really. And then after that, if we're behaving in an ethical manner, in alignment with our values, and who we believe we are and who we want to be and those kinds of things, then we have to trust the outcome. And then we have to learn over time to trust ourselves to respond appropriately to the outcome, whatever it might be, because we can do everything right and have a terrible outcome because just because that's the nature of things that happen in life sometimes. And then relational connectedness increases our resilience. Absolutely. We are wired for connection. We have systems in our brain that help us connect with other people. That idea of feeling felt, feeling known, feeling loved and accepted. Boy, that just goes a long way in increasing resilience and actually in increasing grit as well. If I believe that I am known and loved and worthy of love and value, I will have a lot more ability to persevere through trial and through things that are really hard happening in my life. And then continuing on through identifying solutions. These are solutions for helping to get into that calm state. And we're going through a whole bunch of them. So I hope that you'll kind of keep track of the things that resonate with you. Because when we get to the end of this, I'll ask you to name a couple so that you can practice them. So interpersonal solutions, community is critical to our well-being. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Love and belonging, as Brene Brown said, we talked about this way back last time in our shame discussion. Love and belonging are irreducible needs. That means that they can't be met in any other way. And outside of love and belonging, there is always suffering. So being in community is just critical to our well-being. Interpersonal neurobiology, and those are the principles we talked about with attachment and trauma. Interpersonal neurobiology shows us that we share our emotional states with people, and safe people, when they share their emotional state with us and we can trust them, they can help us calm down. That's that mirror neuron system we were talking about whenever I do this. We're connecting and sharing our emotional states. Our mirror neurons, as you remember, are here, kind of between our eyes and our ears, but further in. So when we share those emotional states, often through eye contact, that's how we can feel known and loved and understood and seen. Being an open system. So those of you who might be a little more analytical or science-minded, the second law of thermodynamics is that all isolated, all closed systems move toward entropy or chaos. So a growing system will have an energy source and a template for growth. So if you're a closed system, if you're not connected to people, if you're not asking for input and feedback, over time you will internally, and you'll feel it, you'll move toward entropy, which is kind of a slowing or a loss of organization and chaos from a thermodynamics perspective. So community is critical. And in community, we must use discernment. We must exercise discernment. People must earn the right to hear your story. We don't just share our story with anybody who's nearby, because that can they might not be a safe person. They might gossip. They might take part of what we said and twist it. Or they might use it to hurt us. All those kinds of things. So we use discernment, and we watch. And people who are safe will have earned the right to hear your story, hear my story. It's an honor for someone to hear your story. No pearls before swine. People must earn the right to hear your story, earning the right to be heard. So another solution that people rarely think about, but there's a real growing body of research and evidence that talks about the helpfulness, the resilience that can come from cultivating curiosity. Curiosity as a mindset can just be incredibly helpful, and it's underutilized very often. So if you think about it, at this picture here, this is it's a little boy with a microscope, a magnifying glass, obviously not a microscope, a magnifying glass looking at the grass and the bugs and things like that. But look at that person, that little person who is entirely engrossed in looking at what he's, just trying to understand it and observing it and things like that. This is a beautiful picture of curiosity. Can you remember the last time that you felt curious like that? A lot of times we've become so kind of had so many guardrails put in us that in our lane at work, we're in our lane at home. We're just in these really habituated patterns of being that we forget to be curious about the world around us, about other people. A great way to get to know people is even just like, tell me more. It can be just little things like that, but having that tell me more mindset, that openness to curiosity, is highly correlated with resilience. When you look at this picture of this child that's just engrossed in the grass and whatever he's seeing through the magnifying glass, what do you think? What do you think about? Can you remember a time when you felt like that? Take a breath, kind of look at it. When was the last time you were entirely engrossed in what you were doing that way? And then write it down if you want. Writing things down can be really helpful. The pace of our lives is just grueling. And so writing things down will help us not lose track. And the older we are, the more actually we probably benefit from writing things down. But you can write those things down and then have curiosity toward yourself. When was the last time I felt really like engrossed and curious about what was happening in front of me? Oh my gosh, I was, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or something like that. So in that spirit of curiosity, what changed? Where did that go? Am I open to it? Curiosity takes judgment and puts it away. Judgment is the determination that something is good or bad, right or wrong, that kind of a thing. And if I'm curious, I'm just learning about it. I mean, we need to be wise. You don't want to put yourself in a dangerous situation, that kind of thing. But if we can put the self-judgment aside and have the curiosity of a small child like this, in those moments, you will forget yourself. You will be free and curious and learning, and it's can really be a freeing experience. Curiosity is quite helpful and often underutilized, as I said. More about curiosity. So I have this quote here. I love it. It's by Einstein, Albert Einstein. He said, "I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious." Another quote of his is that it's not that I'm smarter than everyone. It's that I stay with problems longer. So he lingers with the curiosity and the problem solving until he figures things out. So curiosity is the desire to learn, to understand new things, and to know how things work. A curious personality has been linked, as I said, highly correlated with a wide range of adaptive behaviors, including tolerance of anxiety and uncertainty, positive emotional expression, initiation of humor and playfulness, and so many other things that can come along with being curious. Even think of like a comedian or stand-up comedian. One of the things that's funny is that they take things that might seem unrelated, or they will expand something so that it becomes humorous, and they have to have a curiosity to do that. So curiosity is the doorway to resilience and playfulness and innovation and creativity. Excuse me, curiosity readies the brain for learning by releasing dopamine, and it activates this area of your brain called the hippocampus, that's primed for memory and learning. It creates a sense of anticipation and momentum. So curiosity, again, underutilized, but just free and at our fingertips whenever we have the ability and the willingness to be open to it. And the more genuinely curious we are, the better our problem solving will be as well. And curiosity itself can be a calming strategy. Even as for me, I resonate strongly with nature. Even when I have quiet time in the morning, especially in the summer, I sit on the deck. And, I don't live in the country or anything, but I sit out there, and in the morning, I can hear the birds and I can hear the squirrels, and there's still sometimes some crickets, and I hear the breeze. And as soon as I hear all that and I feel all that, I am calm. I can't get enough of it. I love it. And so I tend to choose the things that I'm drawn to. So these pictures of curiosity as a calming strategy they're pictures of nature. But even like, for example, the Earthscape there, that picture on the right, that is of space and the space between things. Um, that it had to require curiosity on the parts of those people who developed the technology and the ideas and the theorems and the mathematics to get people into space. Curiosity had to be there. But even as you look at the sky and clouds and how they move and change, and being curious about that, being curious about that's actually kind of a plant formation in the middle on the bottom there, or that picture of the trees in the lake. Why is that tree in the middle leaning? I wonder what's going on. Is that planted? Did it get hurt? If I just get curious about what I see, it shifts how I interact with myself and with the world. And I don't know if you can see that picture of the child there. They're jumping into a puddle. There's a phase of development when kids are young that is often called the little scientist phase. And so they're always checking. They'll drop things to see what happens when they drop them. They jump into puddles to see the splash, all those kinds of things. But that has a strong curiosity component. And it can really, as I said, bring out some freedom and creativity in us that we might have kind of left dormant for a while. Curiosity can be an antidote to fear. Curiosity and fear can be reactions to the same thing. And so this is a great quote, that if we get curious about what we can do in light of alarming events and situations that we don't understand, we can get curious about opposing views and how to make lasting change. We can turn fear into curiosity, and then we will find a way through. And that was actually a quote from somebody who has done a lot of work to kind of to process and work through trauma and really challenging relationships and attachment issues and all that kind of stuff. But the fear was a huge barrier, and curiosity ended up being her bridge from fear to a place of greater calm. So then the idea of practicing solutions. So we just went through a list of so many things. We had some physical ideas for how we can calm down, philosophical ideas. We had curiosity. We had long-term and short-term strategies, things like that. So from that list of solutions that we talked about, I really encourage you to name two that resonated with you that you think you might be willing to try. And then make a plan to try them. You can set reminders on your phone. You can place your journal in your work bag to make sure you bring it. There's a lot of things that we can do, and we have a bunch of technology to help us remember to do things. But if we write down those things that we're going to try, those practices we're going to try, that increases the likelihood that we will try it. If we schedule it, so not just write it down, but write it into a schedule, whether it's a scheduling app or a schedule at work or a journal or that kind of thing. If we schedule when we're going to practice it, that in strong, high percentage chance that we will then practice that. So if we make a plan and then set some reminders for ourselves to practice some of these things and see what works. And I use the word practice because that's exactly what it is. You might find a couple of things that really work for you for a while, that really help you feel calm. There might be some songs that really kind of speak to you and help you feel calm and connected and motivated or loved, or what songs, music can just really talk to our emotions in a way that words sometimes can't. That words alone can't. But you also might find after a week, a month, 6 months, that the things that worked to help you feel calm and feel in alignment and feel a greater sense of ease, they might not work anymore. And then you might have to practice and find some new things again. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That's just the nature of us. And you might try something else for a while and then go back to something else, those kinds of things. But it is a practice. We are finding the things that help us feel calm. They help us feel centered. They help us feel kind of come back to ourselves, feel like who we are, like we are in alignment with, who we are and who we are created to be. So, make a plan and then practice those things. And then check in with yourself after a week or 2 weeks do these two, and you can choose more, but you don't want to choose too many or we won't do them. But let's say you choose two of these solutions. Were these two solutions helpful? Do they need to be tweaked? Like, are they kind of helpful, but that particular solution, like, if um, one of my solutions might be to take my dog for a walk early in the morning. Um, well, what if I find that when I go for a walk, I love being out for the walk, but my dog barks at everybody that goes by? That might not be so calming for me. So I might find that I need to tweak it and go for a walk without my dog and then come back and get the dog or, something like that. Or it could be, what, I really thought this was going to be awesome. But now that I do it, I don't. All I can think about is that I'm glad I get to check it off my list, but this isn't helping me feel calm. And it's all fair. So we get curious, what works, what doesn't, what fits, what just doesn't fit. Because there's no right way to do it and it will change over time and that's okay. That's the nature of life. Who you are today and who you are tomorrow. Um, those things are changeable and moldable and shiftable. So check in with yourself after a week or two. Were these solutions helpful? Do they need to be tweaked? Do you just need a couple of different solutions to try? So again, getting curious about that, using curiosity to your benefit. So then do you need to choose two new solutions? Did those two work and you want to keep going with them because, wow, jackpot, I found a couple things that work. Do I want to add another one? Do I want to try a third? Do I want to try a fourth? But if you are kind of keeping track and checking in with yourself about them, you will over time, especially if you're writing them down, you will develop a list of things that are really helpful for you. Because let's say you've got a couple of strategies for helping you feel, kind of calm and true to yourself. And they stop working. In those, when you first realize they're not helping as much as they used to, it's really easy to forget what works, and then we just kind of throw the whole thing out. But if you have been writing them down, and you have them in some kind of a journal or in your app or something like that, in your notes app on your phone, you can pull them up and go, oh, I haven't done that one for a while, and try them again. And that can be a really helpful way to help you continue to kind of grow your catalog, for lack of a better phrase, of activities and beliefs and behaviors that help you feel calm. So how do we find calm? We've just gone through a lot of those things. We're just going to kind of top line it now, talk through it a little bit more. And again, looking at these really long-term solutions. So here's some more, I guess, or other things to be aware of. As we work through our challenges with attachment, our trauma, shame, our sense of calm will increase as we continue to work through those things. So getting calm in and of itself is helpful, but it's really important when you're working through these challenging intrapersonal, so inside me, and interpersonal, and that's those dynamics between two people. As we're working through those things that are deeply challenging and can be really painful, having the ability to calm ourselves is really helpful. And again, encouraging you as you work through those challenges, your sense of calm will increase. Just that baseline calm. So you work through the challenges, so you're resolving some of those difficulties, and things are getting better, and you can feel that, and you're increasing your ability to find what helps you be calm. We will learn to talk to ourselves in a more helpful manner. The critical voice that a lot of us may have grown up with is not motivating. You don't need to tell yourself how bad you are to motivate yourself to be better or do better or stop procrastinating or whatever it might be. More organized. I don't know, whatever the issue is. But over time, as our calm increases, as we are resolving those challenges and working on them, and reaching different levels of growth, we will learn over time to also, again, speak with ourselves, that internal conversation, in a more helpful manner. And related to that, we will be better. We will better manage our time and our thoughts. We won't be victimized by our thoughts. There's a phrase in recovery circles that I'm not punished for my thinking, I am punished by my thinking. And that's what we're trying to do is we're relearning ways to talk so that we do not punish ourselves with our thought patterns. If you journal or write things down, as we just talked about, you will develop a log of helpful thoughts and behaviors that you can use in the future. So we talked a lot about behaviors, but developing some affirmations can be a really helpful thing. Some people will focus on, they might have scriptures, they might have principles about the world that they will remind themselves of. Those beliefs will help them feel more calm. So we'll develop a log of helpful thoughts and behaviors that we can use in the future. So why do we want to do that? Okay, some of it is kind of obvious, of course, Trish. We want to do that. We want to feel better in the future. That's part of why we're engaging in all of these conversations and doing this work. But one of the things that happens is if we have struggled for a long time with issues of attachment or shame or trauma or all of those things, often over time, what we have learned is that we won't take care of ourselves. So, what we are doing as we start accumulating a log or a list or a catalog of thoughts and behaviors and activities that help us feel calm, and as we work through our challenges, we show ourselves that we will take care of ourselves and we will start to believe it because it will be true. We forget that some of the strongest demonstration that we need to make is to ourselves. Challenges, as I said, challenges with attachment and trauma and shame can cause us to get used to letting ourselves down. We can feel like we betray ourselves. As we begin to trust ourselves with ourselves, our sense of calm will increase, and our belief that we can handle life as it comes will increase. And that's, I slowed down when I said that because it's critical, and we forget we are part of the process. And so I'm just going to read it again. We're just struggling through challenges of attachment and trauma and shame can cause us to get used to letting ourselves down. And as we begin to trust ourselves with ourselves, meaning I can trust me to take care of me, our sense of calm will increase. And as we've been talking about, if we practice or experiment with calming activities, behaviors, and thoughts, we write them down, we start incorporating them into our lives as they become habituated, we will find that it's easier to be in our own skin. And I've used the word habituated several times through this conversation. And our habituated self-care practices, our habituated thought patterns, are incredibly powerful. What we know now with brain science and things like that is that the messages through our brains, the function of habit, those messages move through 200 times faster than regular thought. And that's why we can do things in the background once they have been habituated. And so when I habituate exercise, when I habituate managing where I focus my thoughts and how I focus my thoughts, when I habituate eating well and sleeping well and trusting myself with myself, my sense of being okay with being in the world increases because that starts running in the background and then I don't have to think about it all the time. We forget that happens. It just seems like so much work in the beginning. But every 90 to 180 days, our neural networks they consolidate and things become more habituated. And the more habituated they are, the easier they are, and we don't have to think about them. And well-being becomes a habit of our brain as we continue to do these things. Imagine that. How cool is that? That if we had a habit that we didn't even have to think about, that we were doing things that helped us take care of ourselves so that we can trust ourselves with ourselves. So again, incorporate these things into our daily lives, being outside if that's helpful, listening to music, exercising, drawing, writing, sensory comforts, a soft, fuzzy blanket, hot tea, a hot shower, those kinds of things. Um, Talking with a friend, snuggling with a pet, and pets also have that mirror neuron system, dogs in particular, but they can really help us calm, which is one of the reasons for like snuggling with them. Besides the fact that they're kind of usually like soft and fuzzy, um, some people will be calmed by spending time if they have like a reptile, but that's because that's how they interact with the reptile. Like they feel love and protection for a reptile. The reptile isn't necessarily giving us anything back. They don't have mirror neurons, but um, it can still be helpful. Um, and living in alignment with our values will increase our sense of calm and also, surprisingly, our productivity. If I am living in alignment with my values, if I'm um, doing work and interacting with people in a way that matches what I believe about myself and people in the world, that increases my sense of calm and my sense of purpose. And when we increase our sense of purpose, our productivity just incidentally goes up, which is kind of cool. So finally, then, if you can discover what works, I do urge you to write it down. When we're in an activated state, it's hard to remember those things that were helpful. And so having something written down that we can refer to can help us calm down until those things become habituated, until we've got a little habituated self-care under our belts. We might need that resource of having that list or catalog of things that are helpful for us. Um, Strategically place this information where it's helpful. Like if you have a journal, can you keep it in your purse? Do you have a notes app in your phone? How can we use what's available to us so that it's easily accessible? I remember there was a time when I was working with a young mom, and she spent a lot of time in the kitchen, and she was trying to figure out, where am I going to put these reminders for myself, and she's like, I'll put it on the fridge, which she did. And then somebody came over and they're like, oh, what's this? And she realized, I don't like that. That's a little too vulnerable. And so she ended up putting it on the inside of a cabinet door, so she could just open the cabinet door and there was her list. And it was really helpful for her. It was super accessible. It was where she was all the time or spent a lot of time, and there were no prying eyes. So anyway, finding those things and keeping them strategically in a place that's helpful. Let me see. I'm sorry. There's that really little print in my glasses are getting old. Find growth-oriented people. Find other people who are interested in this process, who are interested in growth and support, and who want to be a safe person. And when you can find growth-oriented people, it's it's going to sound funny, it's normalizing. If you're someone who has a bias toward growth and you're surrounded by people who don't, you can really kind of feel like an alien in some ways and feel people are like, why do you always have to think about things? You always make things so complicated. If you can find people with a similar growth mindset, that will help, and it will actually help you spur you on toward more growth as well. Um, so, sometimes seeking a professional is something that needs to happen, and there's nothing wrong with that. So there's a couple of things. If you're seeing a counselor, um, they they kind of know the shortcuts in a sense. So if you were a brand new visitor to Washington, D.C., let's say, and you had to get from one place to the other, you could probably figure it out. You could look at a map, you could use a subway, you could do those kinds of things. But if you knew somebody from the area, they would be like, oh, you know what, you don't want to use the subway at this time of day, or you don't want to be in this area after dark. You want, this kind of thing. So they would help you get there safely and quickly. And that's part of what a counselor can do. In addition, because of professional standards and things like that, generally speaking, a counselor is kind of like a germ-free environment. So if you're coming in and, metaphorically kind of bleeding on the inside, you want that germ-free environment where someone is going to be really careful and protective, and you won't hopefully, again, with professional standards, that person will be able to guide you in a gentle and safe manner. And, for some people over time, medication becomes a really important part of their self-care. So that's just something to consider. So we've talked here, we've spent some time talking about how do we find calm? How do we increase our sense of ease in the world. Because as we do that, that number one helps us work through some of the really challenging things that we will face. And it helps us long term moving forward to increase our resilience. It increases our reservoir of strength and our reservoir of response options so that when hard things happen, we have a lot more that we can draw from. So that's it. That's the end of our conversation for tonight. I really do just want to thank you so much for allowing me to join you in this conversation with Patiently Waiting, really one of my favorite communities of people. So we will meet for some live Q&A here in the future. We're hitting summertime here, and so it's hard for schedules and things like that, but just pay attention to information from Carrie, and we'll schedule our next times where we can have our live Q&A sessions. All right, so in the meantime, I wish you all very well. I hope that you'll practice and find and practice with some of these strategies for grounding and calming and increasing your reservoir for strength and resilience, because you're worth the investment. And remember, it gets habituated over time. So it starts happening in the background. It won't always be hard work. Okay. So thank you again. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. And I will look forward to seeing you all soon.